muktzah, we spoke about the various different reasons and rationale for the issa of muktzah, and we brought 5 different approaches. And one of them was, one of the 3 reasons and explanations that Rambam writes is Shemi Yavo Lasis Malocha, and we said, even though the Rambam doesn't specify, but that reasoning is fitting for Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. Is Kli Shemelachto L'Issur defined B'chlal as a Issa Muktzah, or it is like any other Shavus? So Kli Shemelachto L'Issur is the only one that has a heter tzorech gufoi and tzorech mekoimoi. And why would that be? We do not find a heter tzorech gufoi tzorech mekoimoi by any other muktzah, only by Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. And this demands an explanation. So the Ramban, Kuf Chav Gimel Omid Beis, the Ramban writes, Les by Mishum Hakzoa, Elo Issa Malachtoi Goyremes Lo. And I think the kavanah of the Ramban is the same as the Rambam. What defines all the shvusim are Gzeira, Shemei Yovel Ases Malach. Or actually the Rambam, in his introduction to Perik Chof Aleph, I think, if I could have a Rambam's Manim Hilchos Shabbos inside, or Chof Aleph or Chof Beis, we have one right here. The Rambam says that the Shusim are 1 out of 2. Either Doimel Malacha or Shema Yavoi Lasis Malacha. So, okay, Perik Chof Aleph, like I remembered. Nema b'Torah tishbois. Afilu medvorim she'ein malocha chayav lishbois behem. V'dvorim ha'behem she'osru chachoma mishum shvus. Mehein dvorim asurim mepnei shem doimim malochas. Umehem dvorim asurim gzeira shem yovim mehem issa skila. Ve'elu hein. And the Rambam starts dealing with all the Rabbanans from Perik Chof Aleph and on. So some shuvusim are dumid malacha. For instance, binyan b'kelim. Oyel arai. Oyel arai is somewhat similar to an oyel kva. Binyan b'kelim is somewhat similar to binyan mechubel karaka. Many shuvusim don't resemble a malacha at all. Ein roichon al gabe behemesh. Shemi yachter zemeire. Ein metapchem ve'im meragdin. That's not a malacha. Shemi yatakin kleshia. Ein shotin. Shemi yatakin chovish shel shayotim, and similar. So the Rambam maintains, and I think that's also the kavanah of the Ramban, the is of Kli Shemelachto L'Issur Shemi Yovel Ases Malacha. It is similar to ein metapchen, ein merakdin. It is not mishum hakzoas adas. That's the Ramban. And many other Rishonim also write, it has nothing to do with muktzah. Ritva and Chidush Aran, Kuf Chav Beis, they also write, the Kli Shemelachto L'Issur is lo mishum muktzah. Elo, kol she'ein tashmish rogel, mishum isser hoitzoa nagu bo. And that is one of the fundamental reasonings b'chlal of Issa Muktzah, based on the Gemara. It's mentam eitzah, that is Rashi in Masechet Beitza. So the Rana did it right, it's not Muktzah, but rather eitzah. But didn't we think that eitzah is the reason for all the Muktzahs? Obviously not. That's Shittas Rashi and Toises and Be'er. Maybe not the Rana and the Ritva. Ravid, in the beginning of Masechet Be'er, there's Ravid al Arif, and the Ravid is a bar plukta of the Malamor. In some Masechtas, the Ravid is similar to the Ramban and the Rambam, but not entirely. And the Ravid writes, Nera kareitza lasses b'malacha. It is mishum maris ayin. Not mechashash sheyasa malacha with the Kli Shemelachto L'Issur, but, and that's interpretation number 3, which is a big chiddush. The reason Chachomim asked Kli Shemelachto L'Issur is mishum nera kareitza lasses b'malacha. According to the Ravid, we can understand why tzarech guf and tzarech makoyim is mutar. Because it's obvious that it's obvious what he's doing. So if a person sees him carrying this Kli Shemelachto L'Issur, and he takes a screwdriver and he scratches his head, so people see, okay, so he's not using for a malachas issur or tzarech makoyim. But if the reason is shemi yovarasas malacha, would that explain why it's mutar tzarech guf and tzarech makoyim? No. So we need to say, by muktzah, the issur is across the board. If this is not mishum muktzah, for some reason Chazal were more mekel and hetilu tzarech guf and tzarech makoyim, even though I don't know how to explain it. So according to the Ravid and the Rambam, one would say, if a person has a clear motive why he is carrying this, either it's not nerek hareitzalases malacha, or there's not that much chashash sheyovalases malacha. Because the only reason he's metaltal is he has a clear objective. Tzarech guf and tzarech makoyim. Why weren't they matter machamel itself? So I wrote a big arichas, but it's not the topic we will be discussing today. 3 chosheva achronim, more or less the same period. Reb Loza Moshe Pinsker, and that is the Oyel Moshe. In Shas Vilna, there's a goas for Reb Loza Moshe Horowitz. He was one of the Lithuanian Gedolim, a big Ilui, known in Lit as Reb Loza Moshe Pinsker. I think Pinsk is in Belarus, in Russia Halavana. And he writes it in Shabbos Kuf Chav Beis, the Mishnah Brura, both in Mishnah Brura and in Shar Tzion, see Yud Beis in Mishnah Brura, and Rameir Arik in Minchas Pitim, in Simon Shin Ches Shulchan Aruch, that the het tzarech guf or tzarech makoyim is only im efshar be'inyan achar. He doesn't have another kli that is fitting to achieve his goal. And it is only then that we're matter at tzarech guf and tzarech makoyim. And the same regarding tzarech makoyim. It's not really that important. You could sit elsewhere that there is no het tzarech guf and tzarech makoyim. And what I wrote at the time, and maybe one of the coming shiur we will discuss this, that such a gavaldik chiddush should have been in Rambam and Ramban and Rashba and Shulchan Aruch and somewhere. If it's only a heter be'efshar be'inyan achar. They just wait for the Reb Loza Moshe Pinsker and the Mishnah Brura. It doesn't make sense. And when we find this halacha everywhere and nobody says. So my argument was, it's not a gather of dechuyo, it's a gather lo yasu. If it would be dechuyo, I think it's more reasonable that Machamal itself one should be matir than tzarech makoyim or tzarech gufoy. If it would be dechuyo, then Chamal itself is a hefsid maruba. But tzarech gufoy, tzarech makoyim is not that important. The counter argument would be tzarech gufoy, tzarech makoyim is tzarech yom, it's tzarech Shabbos. Tzarech Shabbos it will matter. Chamal itself has nothing to do with Shabbos. So one could argue it is a gather of dechuyo, but the heter is not the cause of the great importance, but rather tzarech hayom, tzarech Shabbos, and that's tzarech gufoy, tzarech makoyim. Chamal itself wouldn't be tzarech Shabbos. But still, I argue that more likely it's a gather of hutro and not a gather of dechuyo. Lo asru tzarech gufoy, tzarech makoyim. And my main argument would be still sapoiskim, and this is something we talk about a lot. And it is a yesod that we need to use with caution, but still, it's very valid. And I think this is a big tema that nobody till the generation of the Mishnah Brura says tzarech gufoy, tzarech makoyim is only b'shas adchak or k'shei efshar be'inyan achar. So it boils down once again, why were Chazal mekel dafka b'Kli Shemelachto L'Issur tzarech gufoy, tzarech makoyim when we don't find any other muktzah? So according to the Rambam and the Ramban and the Ravid that I just quoted, Shami yovarasas malacha, nerek ha'isa malacha, we can understand that of tzarech gufoy, tzarech makoyim. And maybe Machamal itself is not that obvious. Maybe Machamal itself is not that obvious. So I don't know. I don't remember a clear source in the poskim why dafka b'Kli Shemelachto L'Issur yatir tzarech v'sarech makoymoi. And I do ask all of you, if there's something I'm missing, please let me know. Rab Chaim, Reb Akiva, is there any clear explanation of the Rishonim or the Chonim why the heter of tzarech v'sarech makoym is not found only by Kli Shemelachto L'Issur? The Goen, Yordei Rei Samachov. And that is the din of Mila b'Shabbos, and the Goen speaks about second Shal Mila. The Goen writes, Einoi Muktzah. It's just Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. So the Goen is like the Ramban, the Ritva, the Ran, the Ravid, and many Rishonim that say that Kli Shemelachto L'Issur b'chlal is a geder achar. It's like other Shavusim, and it's not Muktzah. Rashi, Kama Mekoymes in Shas. Shabbos Lamed Hei by Chetzoit says Shabbos Lamed Vov. Rashi writes Mishum Muktzah, and in the Beis Yosef constantly. In the introduction to the Zov Yosef and Shin Ches, when he's Masada, 6 type of Muktzahs, we find that Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. Most of the poskim include Kli Shemelachto L'Issur together with all the other dinam of Muktzah. Because at the end of the day, it's a tiltul, and Kelim Shosel Taltal, and it's a din of Muktzah. And Kli Shemelachto L'Issur fundamentally is also about K'tzuas Hadas. Or the Maktzedasoi, Kli Shemelachto L'Issur, because you can do the Ikar Malacha, K'moshe Maktzedasoi, Machmas Mitzvah, Machmas Mius, or all the other forms of Muktzah. How do we define the Kli Shemelachto L'Issur? Because we find in Halacha Kli Shemelachto L'Issur v'leheter. So, when is the Kli Shemelachto L'Issur defined as Kli Shemelachto L'Issur? Especially according to Rabbi Akiva Eiger. And we'll talk about Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur she'einai ra'ui klal ha'meleches heter, there is no heter of tzorech yivoy, and maybe not even tzorech mikoymoy. And that would be a muktzah gomor. It's hard to think about something that is einai ra'ui l'meleches heter. Unless it's chsorikis. Like a second Shal Mila. You won't use it to peel an apple, and you definitely won't use it to cut a carrot, because a second Shal Mila or a second Shal Shlita, and you're choshesh l'pegima, but then it would be chasor and kiss. What would be a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur she'einai ra'ui klal ha'meleches heter? Maybe a drill or other electrical appliances. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, Malachto L'Issur she'einai ra'ui klal ha'meleches heter, there is no heter of tzorech gufay. So when we're dealing with a classical Kli Shemelachto L'Issur she'ra'ui gam l'meleches heter, so why would it be defined as Kli Shemelachto L'Issur? The Prima Godim, Eishel Avrom, Sivkot and Tes. And most of the sources we talk about today is in Shin Ches Kamuvan. So the Prima Godim says it depends, Roiv Tashmishoy. So even though sometimes we will use this Kli Shemelachto, but if Roiv Tashmishoy L'Issur, then it would be defined as a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. The Bialoch Hasiv Gimel writes, Ikar Tashmishoy or Ikar Yehudoi. So the Prima Godim brings the Rashba Lagabi Kedeira. The Rashba writes pots and pans. Maybe it's more relevant to pots as a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur because you can't cook on Shabbos. But sometimes we also use pots for storage. And when you cook, and you cooked a lot of soup or a big pot full of any other dish, and there are leftovers, you put the pot in the fridge. So pots sometimes are used for storage. And maybe the pot will spend more time in the fridge than on the gas. So if it's roiv, how do we define roiv? Roiv po'omim she'odam mishtamish, or roiv zman ma'akli mishtamish. So pots might spend more time in the fridge than on the gas. But it is clear that pots are not made for storage. There are plastic kelim that are far more convenient for storage. Pots are made for cooking. So if it's roiv, maybe pots shouldn't be mixed. But if it is ikar tashmishoy, then the Rashba is right when saying that pats are Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. Rashi, Kuf Chov Beis Amid Beis, Kornos Shel Egoism. Rashi writes, Iker Malachto L'Heter. It's a hammer, but it's a hammer that's usually used to break open nuts and not to knock in nails. Iker Tashmish L'Heter. So Rashi writes, Ikar. I don't think we could be medayik in Rashi, because if you don't bring this discussion and put it on the table, Ikar and Roiv probably is the same. Cliche Ikar Malachto L'Heter means that B'derech Klal, when Mishnamish B'Heter. It is only when you are down in the suffix that the Prima Godim would define it as Rav Tashmisha, the Be'alucha would define it as Ikar Tashmisha, and there could be an Afkam and a Halacha like he just explained. So the Minchas Shabbos is a Choshev Sefer on Hilchas Shabbos, and he writes about a person that has his talis and tefillin bag. So all week long he has tefillin in that tick, but usually he doesn't have a separate talis for Shabbos, so Erev Shabbos he usually takes out the talis. So Shabbos is always a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. But if you judge most of the time, 6 days against 1 day, it's a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur V'Leheter. So would that be a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur or not? The Marsham in Das Torah brings this suffix, and he says it depends. Two shittas and Sif Chav Beis. Shin Ches Chav Beis. We find two different opinions in Shulchan Aruch. Oster lachasas piachovius be'even o bebekas o lisga be'mesadeles or lahakis ben abarza. אף על פי שחושב עליהם מבויד יומוס או לאלם כן יחדו לקח לעולם. So an Evan, even though the person had a mind, I'm going to use this stone or this piece of wood, lachasa is piachovius, that is not enough. Tzorach liyachdoi. Shulchan says, אלם כן יחדו לקח לעולם, אבל יחדו לשעה בזה בלבד, לא. יש אומרים, שצורך שיעשה במלאכה, יש אומרים, לא ישנו. יש אומרים, even if it's miyachet for Shabbos, that is enough to determine that it's not muktzah. יש אומרים, צורך ליחד לא ילם. So the Masham says, לפי השיטה שצורך ליחד לכל השבוע, then this tefillin bag, most of the week is malachta le'issur v'leheter. But if it's tzorach liachta b'Shabbos, so the determining factor is Shabbos. And what it does in the middle of the week is not relevant. It's a very nice sushtel. One din has nothing to do with the other, because here we're dealing with an Evan that doesn't have a Toilet Kli. And the question is, what is required to give this a Toilet Kli? Would it have a Toilet Kli merely by saying Shabbos I'm going to use it? The first opinion in Shulchan Aruch is no. To take an Evan or just a piece of wood, a block of wood that doesn't have a Toilet Kli, it won't have a Toilet Kli unless you're miyachad le'olam and not mechel Shabbos. What does that have to do with Kli Shemelachto L'Issur, Kli Shemelachto L'Heter? But really, a tefillin bag is b'chlal not a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. A Kli shederech l'taltel b'dov ha'muktzah is not a Melachto L'Issur. Kli Shemelachto L'Issur is a Kli which is miyuchad to do a malacha. So a talis bag b'chlal wouldn't be a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. The question would it be at the buses? And if Shabbos ben Hashmoshes, if Shabbos ben Hashmoshes, there wasn't no tefillin, that it's not a buses. And it's like any other bag, and it's b'chlal not a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur.
There's no tefillin in the talis.
What?
To get the tefillin.
Oh, yeah. So, regarding the din of Kli Shemelachto L'Issur, if Erev Shabbos ben Hashmoshes, there was only tefillin, there was no talis, then it would be a buses l'davar also. If there's only a talis, it will be a basar of double heter. It doesn't matter at all whether it's all week or only for Shabbos. And these two halachas, b'chlal don't have a kesher one with the other.
It would be true also of the inner bag, no? Let's say the felt bag that the person just stores their tefillin in. It also wouldn't ever get the status of a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur.
Right.
It might be a basis, but not a...
Right. So Kli Shemelachto L'Issur is a Kli she'oisem by malacha. And this brings us to a big discussion, which is a machlokes bein gedolei hazman, and I wrote many tshuvas about this. Two are already printed. A minchaso shal shuvas chelek aleph siman lamed gimel, and a chelek beis siman lamed hey. Are you allowed to be metaltal a fan that's running from Erev Shabbos? And this is a very common question. Sometimes you want to position the fan Shabbos, it should be on you. Sometimes it's too cold and uncomfortable, and you want to position it in another direction. It shouldn't blow on you. So are you allowed to be metaltal a fan? And the same question would be a table light, which you use, when you learn, and sometimes it's too bright or not bright enough, and you want to position the light. Would that be a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur, mutar letaltaloi, or would it be a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur? And Gedolei Hazman have different opinions about this, and there's a stira in Igros Moshe. Chelek Gimel, Siman Mem Tes, he writes as Melachto L'Issur. Chelek Hey, Siman Chov Gimel, he writes Melachto L'Issur, and he writes that he himself is metaltal. That's what he writes in Chelek Hey. I think there's an additional tshuva in Chelek Daled, and I brought this in my sefer, but I wasn't mitzayin where that is. So if you find it, just please let me know. Shmiya Shabbos Kelchasa, Chav Tesvav, is a machmir Melachto L'Issur according to what he heard in the name of Rabbi Yashir. On the other hand, Perek Yud Gimel, Ha'ora Kuf Lamed Daled, he heard from Reb Shimon Zalman that it's mutar, and he writes it Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. So Rav Noived Baker was a Talmud of Reb Shimon Zalman, and many times I heard from him. He said, "This is not my sefer; it's Reb Shimon Zalman's sefer." And at the end of his days, Rav Noived put out a new edition of Shmiya Shabbos Kelchasa, which was really advanced and revised, but the chesaron of it is we could no longer say that this is the Shimon Zalman Sefer, because Rav Noived said that Shimon Zalman went over every ha'oren, every line, and every sivkoten, but that was relevant to the first edition and not to the second. But so the Shmiya Shabbos Kelchasa brings two conflicting opinions, and a bunch of there are two different shilas. My svara was, and the both tshuvas that are printed in a Chelek Aleph and a Chelek Beis, that this is not defined as a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. Kli Shemelachto L'Issur is a Kli that you use to do a malacha, but a Kli that you can't use unless you did a malacha, but the Kli doesn't do a malacha, that is not defined as a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. A pen would be a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. An electrical appliance like a drill would be a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. Hammers and nails would be Kli Shemelachto L'Issur, but a fan
a paper also
is intended to give air, or a radiator gives heat,
a paper
or a table light gives light, and that is not a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur.
a piece of paper that you don't do malacha with it is also is considered a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur.
Yeah.
But you don't do the malacha with the paper.
Well, you write on the paper, so paper would be somewhat like the pen. You use these two instruments for writing. So one could argue, you use paper to read, but if you have an empty sheet, that is for writing. Some say that paper is muktzah machmesonkis, but that maybe we'll talk about that when we get to chesonkis.
What about an alarm clock? You do the work from before so that it would go off when you want to wake up.
Why would alarm clock be Kli Shemelachto L'Issur?
You press snooze.
I don't know about snooze, but you have to set it. You have to set it.
Alarm clocks is the mechanical one, which definitely wouldn't be a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. But you talking about an electrical alarm clock? I don't think it's a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. It is made to wake you up. But usually press to put it off. Maybe that would be a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. Maybe. Because in its normal usage, you do a malacha with this Kli. Masha ain't getting a fan. Or a light.
The Pri Megadim in two places says that a watch which you set is considered a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur since it's a malacha to set it, even though the usage has no malacha.
Yeah. The Mishnah Brura Shin Ches Kuf Samech Ches speaks about watches and clocks. I do not recall the Pri Megadim, but in Kuf Samech Ches, and that is Sif Nun Aleph, Masha Moira Ala Shoah Shekoren Rilo Zo, Ben Shu Shel Choel, Ben Shu Shel Min Acher, Yesh Lestapik, Emuter Etaltaloi, Vekvar Poshet, Haminag Lesor. And this is a very interesting halacha. Domen Medidas Hazman, O Atzel, V'ava V'chal Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. Did a Medida B'Shavas Osom, Kishe'ein a Medida Shel Mitzvah. U'makol Moker Ikar HaMedida, Eino Shel Mitzvah, Gufay Mekoimoi, Shori. So, how is a Sha'on Chol called in English? Sand clock, yeah? What's a Sha'on Chol?
Same time.
Sand?
Timer.
Sand timer. So the Shulchan Aruch is Mesupik?
Hourglass, yeah.
Oh, an hourglass, right. So, Shulchan Aruch is Mesupik with that, it would be a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur or not. What's the suffix? Medidas Issur. But Medidas is only in Esderabon. Would that be defined as a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur? And the reason it's called an hour clock because usually these clocks work for an hour. And therefore, it's unlike a fan that you just put it on and it runs. These were used all the time. You know, you turn it over and you turn it back. I actually have a bunch of these instruments in my office for Tokadei Achilas Plus people that need to eat in Yom Kippur. So the one I have is 4 minutes. So if a person, an elderly person or an ill person knows he needs to drink Tokadei Achilas Plus, so I give him one of these and he uses it constantly. So this is a suffix. So the Mishnah Berurah writes, Sivkot and Kuf Samaches. Ubezege Shalonu, Yesh Lahatio, Pri Megadim v'Machsheka v'Shar Achroinim. ודווקא הקטנים שקוראים תשנור, אבל הגדולים שקוראים ואינדור עושה לטלטלה, אפילו עושים קלישות, ורואים דם על הקרקע, יש לאחמם מטלטלן, הם לא לצורך מקום מוי. Probably this is the Pri Megadim you're referring to. I do not recall what the Pri Megadim says, because it's a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. Does he? Could we check with the Pri Megadim? Because this halacha is the Shar Tshuva, Matzik Brocha the Chidah, Rabbi Yankev Emden, and it is not clear what is the difference between a wristwatch and those big clocks that either on the wall or they stand. If it's a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur, why would a wristwatch be mutar? So the Pri Megadim writes, because it's a tachshit. Tzorachiyun, whether a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur would be mutar, because it's a tachshit.
Unless they say that that's its Iker Shemush.
What?
Unless one would tie it, the Punkt tells time. It's really to show off that you have a fancy watch.
Unless we would say, yes, that is the Iker Shemush. But I think a watch is a watch. But at the end of the day, it's not like a chain or a bracelet or another tachshit. So would there be a heter Kli Shemelachto L'Issur if it's a tachshit? And the Mishnah Berurah is talking about any wristwatch. So today there are smart watches that have 1,000 different functions, and are they mutar or not? Some watches you can't even see what time it is unless you press a button and you activate the system, and that definitely would be a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur. So our fundamental question is, a Kli that doesn't do a Maleches Issur, but to activate it and to make it effective, involved in Issur, would that be defined as a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur? Do we have the Pri Megadim about the watches? Oh, so to the best of my memory, neither the Pri Megadim, nor the Yankev Emden, nor the Matzik Brocha, and those are the three sources of this Mishnah Berurah, do not explain why would it be an Issur. is it Kli Shemelachto L'Issur? So he writes a wristwatch is mutar. Maybe a watch on the wall or those big organs which stood on the floor is also, according to the Chazon Ish, is also because kovei lo mokum. And the Chazon Ish says anything that's kovei lo mokum, and the reason you're not metaltal mamokum is it might break. That's muktzah machmas son kiss, and that is the reason it's muktzah. So the difference between a wristwatch and the big ones is not because this is attached and that is not attached. It's not malachto l'Issur at all. It's a different concept of muktzah. Kovei lo mokum and muktzah machmas son kiss.
And takshit, by definition, doesn't have a place.
I think the more relevant source would be ner and psila. And ner and psila is a machlokes Tosos and the Ramban. In Shabbos Kuf Chav Beis, whether they're muktzah, malachto l'Issur, or not. So the Magen Avraham, Reisha Ayin Tes Sivkot Yud Beis, also quoted by the Mishnah Brura, ner and psila is malachto l'Issur. Reisha Ayin Tes Yud Beis, Shin Ches, Yud Ches. Where's the people going? So the Mishnah Brura Shin Lamed Ches Mish Betzois. What is he talking about? Shin Lamed Ches. What's the Taz? Okay, so we're dealing with a clock that makes noise every hour or every half hour. Zoga mekashkesh l'shois mutar la'orcha v'lachinem en boidiyim. So the Pri Megadim writes, ואם נאמר דאורן שלנו מותר לטלטל שהן ככלי תכשיט וכדומה וגם מותר לאורחה בשבס מכל מוקרים מה שמשמיע קול עושה לאורחה בשבס אבל כעושה מסה להשמיע קול בשבס אבל ככלי שיר או כלי המיוחד לכך שמייתקננו אם כן הווה מלאכתו לאיסור. So I think he says malachto l'Issur because it's like Kli Shear. It's like a guitar or other Kli Shear, not because you need to activate it with a malacha, but actually does a malachas Issur.
Would an alarm clock have the same thing?
But he's saying the Isser is to be Eirich. Kind of Isser to have it running on Shabbos. Isser is much more also the
He says both. He says both.
He says it for its mutter orcha.
A normal watch, mutar la'orcha v'mutar l'taltaloi. But the one that's mashmiya koil, he writes, osa la'orcha b'Shabbos, dava ko'oisa masa la'ashmiya koil b'Shabbos. V'hava ke'klei shir. Because if it is used, and that's why osa la'orcha b'Shabbos. O kli ha'miyuchad lekach, shemi yitaknenoi, ayin oisalaf, im kein hava malachtoi le'ismi.
It's Iker Tashmish is the noise?
It's a chiddush of the Pri Megadim. I would say the Iker Tashmish is just to see what time it is. But anyway, so the Pri Megadim does speak about malachta l'Issur, but it speaks about specifically about the ones that are mishmiya koil. But the ones that aren't mishmiya koil, he says mutar l'orcha b'Shabbos. So in mutar l'orcha b'Shabbos, we don't have a raya to the contrary, because there's no Issur involved neither with setting it up and nor with what the watch does. So we don't have a raya from this Prima Godim Khan or Khan. But Ner and Psila, that wouldn't be a raya. So it's a machlokes Tosfos on one hand, Ramban and Rashba on the other hand. And when the Morav Rom writes, Reishain Tes Shin Ches, that the Manach Teresa, the Bekivega, quotes the Ramban and the Rashba, that it is not considered Manach Teresa. Tosfos is in Lamed Vav, Ramban Rashba, Kuf Chav Beis. My argument is, Ein ledamos nerve psila to a fan or a table light. Nerve psila burn. Burning is maleches mavia. So even though the person put on the candle Erev Shabbos, but that is Malachta L'Issur. Fire is mavia. And the Ner and the psila give fire. The fan gives wind.
A nair that's off.
What?
It's more like a nair, a fan that's off is like a nair that's off. A nair that's on is a bosses anyway.
Yeah, but the Rishonim are masber, why is it Mitzad Bosses and not Kli Shemelachto L'Issur? That's the Ramban and the Rashba. Why is it Mitam Bosses and not a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur? But even if we say we're dealing with an Ner and a Psila that are not lit, but this is Malachto L'Issur, because the Malach of a Ner and Psila is to give fire. And fire is Mabir. That's Havora. A fan gives wind. A table light gives light. Yes, they're using electricity, but the electricity is boina, maka bepatish. It is only activating. It's not the same as fire. So the ner and psila are mavio.
What if we still had incandescent bulbs? If we still had incandescent bulbs in the table light?
Maybe that would be different. Maybe. But I'm not sure. Because the ner and psila give fire. Yes, they give warmth, they give light, but it's fire. And fire is mavio. Masha enkain, a fan, or a table light.
A fan gets off, also the Rav would say, it's not Malachta L'Issur.
A fan that's off, I don't think it would be defined as Malachta L'Issur. Maybe there would be other reasons not to be metaltal. But even if it's off, I don't think it would be defined as Malachta L'Issur. Malachta L'Issur doesn't depend on the present situation. Yes, to use it, you will need to put it on, but that is somewhat of a gzera that we do not find. What we find is Malachta L'Issur. I think a fan or... But even if we would say an erva psila is Malachta L'Issur when they're not burning, and I think there are rayas and ferocious that when an air is burning, it definitely would not be defined as Malachta L'Issur. But I don't know whether it's a raya because it's a bosses anyway, and bosses is chomer Malachta L'Issur. So it's a bosses anyway. But I think that the Rishonim explain why is it mitam bosses and not mitam Malachta L'Issur, and that's the machlokes Tosfos and the Ramban. So fundamentally, I think that a fan or a table light, when they're on, would not be defined as Malachta L'Issur. So as I said, the Gedol Azman, we find Deus Lakan or Lachan, and because we're dealing with an Issa Derabonon, my netiya is to be Mekel, but in most cases, we're dealing either with Tzorech Gufoy or Tzorech Mekoimoy. Because if you want to position them for your usage, that would be Tzorech Gufoy. And if it makes you uncomfortable, that would be Tzorech Mekoimoy. So I think it is clear that I want to move the fan away because it makes me cold. That would be Tzorech Mekoimoy because I feel uncomfortable and I will need to move away. That's Tzorech Mekoimoy. And if I want to position a fan, it should blow on me. That would be Tzorech Gufoy. So in any event, there would be a heter of Tzorech Gufoy or Tzorech Mekoimoy. I wrote a tshuva about an interesting shaila. Person Friday night goes to the sink and he finds his cell phone is in the sink. Could he take it out? would that be tzorech makoim or maybe Muhammad itself? I mean, you could use the sink when your cell phone is in there, but that would be Muhammad itself. You're going to ruin your phone. Or the fact is, I'm not going to use the sink because I don't want to ruin my cell phone. So would that be tzorech makoim?
Mishnah Berurah says that tzarech harama.
Tzorech.
You can do chamelet sale the derech harama. So I want to put a dish in the sink, so I need the place. I move out the phone.
So that would be eitzah.
It's not in the chama. It's not in the chama. I want to be mishamish with his mugging to that work, but I can't do it because of this.
Why can't you? You could.
Then
But
it will
you're
be
gonna
a
destroy it.
situation of chama itself, but before it.
So Misvor, I paskin, you could take it out, and that would be defined as tzorech makoim, because the fact is, you're not going to use it. Leil Shabbos, and the person doesn't know how. On the Shabbos table, beautifully set, there's a big hammer. Would that be tzorech makoim? Well, there's enough space on the table, but it's extremely uncomfortable. You know, we don't want a hammer on a Shabbos table. Would that be tzorech makoim? It could be metaltal. So, Reb Shlomo Zalman, I think, is the first that quotes a sefer Hiyoምህashchor. I don't even know who wrote the sefer, but everybody quotes him. That if a person wants to be mishamish in ishtoi and there's tefillin in the room, you could take the tefillin out, and that would be defined as tzorech makoim. And this is a new type of tzorech makoim. It's not that you need the space, but you need the tefillin out. You should be able to use the room for what you intend to use the room. Would that be like tzorech makoim? If the logic of tzorech makoim is I want to use this space, then the Hiyoምህashchor paskins and Reb Shlomo Zalman quotes him, that would be tzorech makoim, because I cannot do what I want to do as long as the tefillin is here, and therefore we could take the tefillin out, and that would be defined as tzorech makoim. Would we say the same when there's a hammer or a chayfetz shel mikzah on a Shabbos table? Maybe yes, maybe not. Because in the tefillin in your room, you can't be mishamish. Hammer on the table, you could do everything you would do on your normal Shabbos table. It just feels extremely uncomfortable. So I still would be mekel. Because my fundamental reasoning is, why is there a difference between tzorech gufo and makoim and Muhammad itself? So once again, if it would be the importance, then Muhammad itself would be more important than tzorech gufo and makoim. So it is tzorech Shabbos. And if this is not covered Shabbos, and it bothers you on Shabbos, lo goram et tzorech makoim. So with a hammer on the table, it is difficult clearly to define. It isn't tzorech gufo, but maybe in a way it would be tzorech makoim. So the Hiyoምህashchor, I don't know how important the source is, but the Zalman quotes him, and if that is tzorech makoim, it is a certain extension of tzorech makoim. So I say, why not stretch it a bit more? If we stretch it anyway, we might as well give it an additional kvetch, because we're dealing with an issa d'Rabbanan, and the way I understand tzorech gufo and tzorech makoim is tzorech hayom, tzorech Shabbos, and that is why Chamal itself they weren't mekel, and this is also tzorech hayom.
Chaman itself is also sharing his whole Shabbos. He's ruining his basement. Someone's getting ruined outside.
But that is indirect. That is indirect. Like you know, it is very difficult many times, as we all know from every sugya we learn. We try to define what Chazal say, but we don't argue against their logic. So we just need to understand what is the difference between Chamal itself and tzorech gufo and makoim. We don't dispute the logic. So Muhammad itself, sometimes you might have tremendous agmas nefesh, sometimes not. You know, it depends how choshev the thing is. But what is the fundamental difference? And therefore, in both interesting questions, hammer on your Shabbos table, cell phone in the sink. I feel more comfortable with the cell phone in the sink because I can't use that sink as long as that Kli is in there. So that would be a good answer, b'derech harama, according to the Mishnah Brura. Or I also would be makel taking the hammer off the table, tiltul kalach hayad, loy letzorech hakli, loy letzorech hamuktzah, u'amata b'kalach hayad. So it is always advisable to try to minimize the shaylas, but by halachic definition, I think that would be defined as Kli Shemelachto. So going back to the fans, Neder ani is that sheyesh lahakol, that a fan or a table light that is burning and its light would not be defined as a Kli Shemelachto. So some Svarim, some Gedolim write, you cannot be metaltal any lighting system because it's a bosses. Bosses l'shalheves. And I think that's a mistake. Because this is a Kli. And every part of the Kli is part of a Kli. Masha ein kain, ner, shemen, psila, kulam, bosses l'shalheves. Because the shalheves is a dover of neatzmoy. Even it's an incandescent light, which has a chut, but it's part of a Kli. And a Kli is a Kli, and Kli metalatal. And therefore I think you could be metaltal any form of lighting. If it's dover metal, if it's a light on your table, I think would not be defined as a bosses, nor would it be defined as a Kli Shemelachto L'Issur and mutalatal.